Uh-oh. I probably don't need this.
Okay.
I guess in my career, if you did the math, Lucy was nice enough to call me and tell me she couldn't figure out how to do 39 years in the military when I graduated from high school in '68. Now, but the reality of it is that I never was any good at math, but I did serve 39 years in the military, because what happened was, just actually before I graduated from high school, I joined the National Guard here at the Air Guard, actually. And so I did several years in the National Guard and lived in this area for about 10 or 12 years after high school. And then a person I had worked with from the National Guard had gone on what they called an active duty tour to D.C. And then he called me and asked me if I'd be interested to come down to D.C. for a couple of years. So I packed up and moved to D.C. with my wife and 2 daughters, and said that we're just going down there for a couple of years, and then of course we'll return to Connecticut, because that's where we live and that's our home. So 26 years later, I'm still in D.C., if you will, and ended up doing 22 or 23 years of active duty with the Air Force. And then when I got out of the Air Force and retired, had my big retirement ceremony, and yes, I get my retirement check every month, thank you, taxpayer. And about 6 months or so after retirement, if you will, my former boss, who was the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, called me up and said, we need you to come back in the reserves. Well, I'd been in the National Guard and I'd just done all this active duty, and now they wanted me to join the reserves. So I said, sure, put the uniform back out of the closet, went back to work. Actually, only one day a month. I worked at the Pentagon, so I did that gig for about 5 years, and then finally they threw me out for good and said, you're done. So that's where the 39 years came from. It turns out, interestingly enough, how everybody, lots of folks stayed in the West Hartford area, and it turns out that Lucy is 2 blocks from my office. She lives 2 blocks from my office. And she called me to talk to me, and she wanted to come by the office. I said, well, where do you live? She said, well, I live in D.C. Well, whereabouts on 2nd Street? I could throw a rock and hit her house right in my office. And so that was kind of interesting. And then Ann, of course, lives in Baltimore, which is right up the road from where I am, so it was an interesting world. I actually stayed in the land of Leave It to Beaver, okay, in the military for all intents and purposes, because we went from the closed environment, if you will, of the West Hartford community to a community. We lived on Andrews Air Force Base for 12 years. And if you live on base in any military installation, it is as close to Leave It to Beaver as you can possibly get, because everybody watches out for everybody else. And everybody is, most stay-at-home parents in that environment. Rode my bike to work for a couple of years when I was actually working on Andrews, the home of Air Force One. Came home for lunch and did all those kinds of things. It was just kind of a weird environment, if you will. In the meantime, the airplanes are sitting there on the airplane, and, the National Guard is on alert and those kinds of issues. So it's, and the other side, of course, that makes it really interesting is from a diversity standpoint, obviously. The diversity in an Air Force base is huge. And as a matter of fact, next Wednesday we leave from Maryland to fly to a wedding in Avoca, Iowa, which is the second time in my life I've been to Avoca, Iowa, which is, I can't even explain where it is, but it's, I know you have to fly into Nebraska. I get there. But I mean, just Air Force friends of ours. And so now, of course, all this is killing us now, because all of our Air Force friends are actually, over the years, the kids have all been getting married. And of course, we're going to all these weddings all over the country, because everybody gets married in their hometown. So, but you had a very strict family structure. If you're not familiar with the military and the don't ask, don't tell policies and all those kinds of worlds, I mean, it's just a different world. And we have nothing against all you civilians, but it's our role and it's our duty, and it was a great opportunity for me to see the world. I worked for 12 years in the Air on active duty with the National Guard units.
Nice.
I know. And it was a great experience. I've traveled, of course, all over the world and all over the country. I've been to every state in the Union several times over. I've been to the South Pole twice. If you want to talk about South Pole, I was in the Pentagon at 9/11 and got out unscathed, but a lot of my friends didn't. So, my time. Okay. Thank you. Well.
Well, let's see.
Great, first I have a question. Were you president of the class or president of the student council?
Student council.
Oh, wow. Okay, we all had a question about that.
Peter Gabriel.
Peter was the president.
on the list. There's no question, our high school era was Leave It to Beaver, when you think back about that. But what I'm going to talk about today is that, for whatever reason, maybe consistent with what I was even doing in high school, is that my life has been all about food in particular, but also about changing the world around that. And that's how I ended up in D.C. working with McGovern for 4 years. Got there a little ahead of Tommy, I guess. And did food policy and health policy with him. And then I got involved with organic farming for a while and realized if there was no way to sell the food easily, why would anybody grow the food organically? So that's how I got to Whole Foods. And one thing led to another, and 16 years, went from 4 stores to almost 140 while I was there, and left there as president. But what that was really all about was trying to change people's perception of environmental issues around food and how we grow food and what we're eating. But what I did mostly in that 16 years, which I've discovered Linda's whole life has been about, is business culture. Because not only did I want to help people rethink food and the environment, I wanted to work on better ways to run businesses and to treat people and empowerment structures within business, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was the work I really focused on. But then finally, since I was traveling, I was probably away 150 to 200 nights a year at the end of my career there. My daughter was 11 in 2001 and wouldn't speak to me because she didn't know me. I said, this is unacceptable, so I quit and stayed home the last 7 years and gotten her off to college starting this fall, and therefore ready to go back into some organic farming initiatives that I need to do. So that's a shorthand of things that have changed dramatically, obviously, over the last 40 years. And 3 topics, though, that I want to put out there for maybe discussion today are very pertinent to this year. The boomers' role in national politics. My own opinion is the best and the brightest generally did not go into politics in our generation. We did other things, and we're paying a little bit for that. The second is boomers' retirement and second careers. One of the things West Hartford in particular, I think, our class represents is that we were mostly highly educated, have done well, usually financially. And many of us, as empty nesters looking for mid-career, mid-life changes, we have a tremendous amount that we can contribute going forward still. We've done many great things, I'm sure, but there's a lot more we could do. And with our education and our money, I think we have an obligation to look and find those passions that we want to continue to focus on, even in our 60s and 70s. And finally, I am very much on the global warming problem, which is why I'm working on organic farming issues still, which is that the parallel for me is when we wrote a report back in 1977 called Dietary Goals for the United States in the U.S. Senate. We said people really need to eat less fat, less sugar, eat more vegetables, etc., fruits. We got a lot of crap, of course, from the beef producers and the egg producers, et cetera, et cetera. And we said, well, look, you know, we don't know for certain about this issue, but the science suggests it would be prudent to take action. Well, I think global warming may even be a stronger case right now, that while there's still controversy about is this just a phase as opposed to a real problem that's man-made, the prudent course of action is to deal with the problem and do a better job than we have. So those are my 3 points I'm throwing out on the table for those who might want to talk more about them in the next, is it really, it's 3:30 we have to stop. So we've got about 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Here, Lucy.
Great. Do we need this for you guys?
No.
Okay,
No.
let's put it away then. Anybody that wants to talk, why don't you stand up and say your name so that, and just throw it out there.
Urban Greensboro. One of the things that was not part of this panel and I was sort of surprised about